You killed him!
I pulled the trigger.
That's the same thing!
No, it isn't.
A 20-year-old recruit is dead because of you!
Then explain why the rifle failed after I fired it.
Silence. Nobody answered, because nobody in that room had an answer. They only had someone to blame. Before sunset, the army had already decided who would carry the dead recruit's name for the rest of her life. The investigation hadn't even begun. The rifle hadn't been examined. The ammunition hadn't been tested. Yet somehow, the verdict already existed. But the woman they were trying to break refused to confess. 9 days later, one forgotten report would uncover a secret nobody on that firing range was ever supposed to find, and expose a cover-up far bigger than a training accident. 3 weeks earlier, none of them knew a routine live-fire exercise was about to end with a recruit dead, and one soldier accused of murder. Quick pause before we continue. If you're watching this from somewhere in the world right now, let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're enjoying stories like this, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because tomorrow's episode, it goes even deeper than this. Fort Kestrel sat low against the Georgia pines, the kind of base that never made headlines, which was exactly how Staff Sergeant Norah Halverson preferred it. She ran the live-fire qualification range for Basic Combat Training Company C, a job the personnel office had handed her 4 years ago, the way people hand off something they don't know what else to do with. Norah was 34. She had a scar along her left forearm that recruits assumed was from training and never asked about twice, because something in her face told them not to. She wore her sleeves down even in July. She signed range logs, checked weapon serial numbers, corrected grips, and said very little that wasn't operational. The other instructors called her thorough. Some called her stiff. Nobody called her what she used to be, because almost nobody remembered, and Norah worked hard to keep it that way. 6 years earlier, in a valley nobody back home could find on a map, she had been a forward observer attached to a reconnaissance element, calling range and elevation into another soldier's ear while he steadied a rifle against a rock. That soldier's name had been Wes Calder. He had trusted her numbers the way you trust gravity, without needing to check. She still dreamed about the numbers. In the bottom of her wall locker, beneath a folded PT uniform nobody ever had reason to move, sat a small tin box she had not opened in 3 years. She knew exactly what was inside it without looking. She kept it anyway, the way some people keep a wound they've stopped bleeding from, but never quite let close. She did not talk about Wes Calder. She talked about zero windage and cant angle and follow-through, because those were things she could still control. This particular Tuesday, a new class of basic combat training recruits arrived at the range for weapons qualification. 31 18-year-olds and one 26-year-old who'd been a diesel mechanic before she enlisted. Her name was Tessa Marlowe, and in 9 days, she would be the most hated name on the entire installation for a crime she never committed. Nobody knew that yet, least of all Marlowe. Ammunition for Fort Kestrel's ranges came from a single supplier that year, Vireo Defense Systems, a mid-sized contractor that had underbid 2 larger companies to win the base's small arms contract. The paperwork called it a cost-efficiency initiative. Base Ordnance Officer Colonel Grant Ashby called it his legacy. Ashby had spent 11 years angling for a full bird promotion that kept slipping past him twice already, both times to younger officers with cleaner spreadsheets and worse instincts. His promotion board convened in 12 days. The Vireo contract was the single line on his efficiency report that finally made the math work in his favor, 22% under previous procurement costs, a number that looked good enough to erase a decade of being passed over. Brigadier General Paul Ferris, the installation commander, had said as much to Ashby's face 3 weeks earlier, standing in his office with a printout in one hand.
Numbers like this get careers unstuck, Grant. Don't give me a reason to regret trusting them. You won't, sir.
Ashby had not told the general about the phone call he'd taken 4 months before that conversation. A soft-spoken Vireo regional liaison named Lewis Kern, informing him that an early production lot of 5.56 rounds had failed pressure testing at a rate the Army would never knowingly approve.
It's a rounding error failure rate. Most people would never notice the difference.
Kern had said over the phone, his voice as smooth and unbothered as a man discussing weather. 1 in several thousand. Statistically, it will never surface. Pulling the lot now costs us both the renewal. I'd hate for either of our names to be attached to that kind of delay, Colonel. In Kern's own office 3 states away, the math looked even simpler than it had sounded on that call. Vireo carried contracts at 11 installations. A single flagged lot, pulled and replaced, would cost the company an estimated $2.3 million in penalty clauses and delay fees. A single lot quietly shipped and forgotten cost nothing at all, as long as nothing went wrong. Kern had run that calculation the way other men checked a weather forecast, and moved on to his next call within the hour. Ashby signed off on the lot anyway, burying the release under 6 other line items on a Friday afternoon when nobody read anything closely, and told himself the odds of a failure were small enough not to matter. He was wrong exactly once. That was all it ever takes. 2 days before the qualification range opened for Marlowe's class, Kern flew down personally to walk the installation, smiling at junior officers, admiring the range facilities, standing a little too long beside the ammunition storage bunker like a man checking on an investment. Ashby walked beside him the entire visit, saying almost nothing, sweating through his collar in air conditioning, cold enough to see your breath.
12 days until you're bored. Let's not have anything complicate that. Understood?
Kern said as he boarded his return flight. Ashby smiled the way men smile when they've already decided what they'll sacrifice if it comes to that, and it will not be themselves. Marlowe shot better than anyone in her platoon and hated that everyone noticed. She kept her chin down at the line, elbows locked, breathing counted in 4s, the way Norah had taught her that morning, without meaning to adopt a favorite.
Loosen your shoulder. You're choking the stock.
Norah said, crouching beside her. You're choking the stock. Copy, Sergeant.
You flinch before the round breaks. Why?
Don't want to miss.
You'll miss worse flinching than you will breathing. Trust the rifle to do its job. Your job is the trigger.
Marlowe hesitated. Don't want to miss. You'll miss worse flinching than you will breathing. Norah tapped the stock twice. Trust the rifle to do its job. Your job is the trigger. Nothing else. Marlowe exhaled and put 5 rounds inside a group the size of a fist. Norah almost smiled. She hadn't done that in a while. She didn't know yet that within a week, this exact conversation would be read back to her in a closed-door office by a man who wanted it to sound like negligence instead of what it actually was, a good soldier finally getting good. The malfunction happened 3 days later, on a live fire buddy exercise, a controlled pairs drill where recruits fired downrange in sequence under close supervision. Marlowe was up first, on Norah's whistle, at 15 meters. Her second round did not fire cleanly. It fired late, a hang fire, the ugliest kind of failure a rifle can have, where the round ignites a half second after the trigger breaks instead of the instant it should. In that half second, Marlowe, trained to clear a stovepipe the way every soldier is trained, had already begun to move the weapon off target. The round left the barrel at an angle nobody could have predicted and struck Private Sam Roth, standing at the ready line 11 meters to the side, waiting his turn. He was 20 years old. He had been in the Army for 6 weeks. Norah heard the shot break wrong before she saw the fall. 6 years of training told her the sound was off half a beat before her eyes confirmed it. She was already running when Roth hit the ground. Cease fire! Cease fire! Weapons down! Hands visible! Now! Every rifle on the line dropped. Marlowe stood frozen at her position, her weapon still smoking, her face white as chalk.
I didn't move it. I swear. It just...
Don't talk. Norah was already at Roth's side, pressing both palms to a wound that pressure alone was not going to fix. "Get me the medic bag. Now. Somebody call it in." She worked over him with the same hands that had once packed a mountainside wound, while rounds struck rock nearby, counting compressions instead of elevation corrections. And for 4 minutes the range went completely silent except for her voice, low and even, telling a dying boy to stay with her. Sam Roth died at 0847, 12 minutes before the medevac helicopter's rotors were even audible over the tree line. Colonel Ashby learned of the death at 0851. By 0910, before a single official statement had been taken, before the range had even been cleared, he was already on the phone with the installation's public affairs office, using the phrase, "isolated training error, most likely operator caused," a sentence with no evidence behind it yet, built entirely out of the shape he needed the story to take. 2 Army casualty notification officers arrived at a small house outside Dayton, Ohio, at 1740 that same afternoon, in dress uniforms that Carol Roth recognized from the doorway before either of them said a single word. She had been a mother of a soldier for exactly 6 weeks. She understood, in the half-second before the knock finished, that she was no longer going to be one. The words they used were careful, official, and almost entirely without detail. A training accident, still under investigation, more information to follow through her son's unit. Nobody told her that afternoon about a hangfire round or a lot number or a colonel 2 weeks from a promotion board. She was handed a folded flag's worth of language and asked to be patient while the Army decided what the rest of the truth would eventually look like. She hung her son's basic training photo on the wall above the phone that night, the one where he was still grinning like the Army was the best decision he'd ever made, and waited for a call that would tell her what actually happened to him. She did not yet know that call would take 3 more weeks, and that when it finally came, it would carry a truth nobody at Fort Kestrel had wanted to give her at first. "Negligent discharge," Ashby said, sliding a folder across the desk in his office 2 days later. General Ferris sat in the corner of the room, arms crossed, his presence lending Ashby's version of events a weight it hadn't earned. Private Marlowe moved her weapon off target during a hangfire, in direct violation of malfunction clearing procedure. That is what the preliminary finding will say. Norah sat across from him, spine straight, hands flat on her knees. "That's not what happened. You have a different account? I have physics. A hangfire round doesn't travel 11 meters laterally because a recruit twitched her wrist. Something was wrong with that round before it ever left the chamber." Ashby's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The rifle passed armory inspection that morning." "I didn't say the rifle. I said the round." General Ferris uncrossed his arms. "Sergeant Halverson, I understand you were close to this incident, but the Army has procedures for exactly this kind of finding, and Colonel Ashby has run this range's ordnance program without incident for 11 years. With respect, sir, 11 years without incident doesn't mean 11 years without risk. It means the risk hadn't caught up yet." Ferris's eyes narrowed slightly, not unkindly, but with the particular impatience of a man who has a contract renewal review on his calendar and does not want this conversation to be the reason it slips. "You're not an ordnance specialist, Sergeant." "No," Norah said. "I'm a range safety NCO, with 6 years of combat deployments, calling elevation and load data for a designated marksman, and I'm telling you that round behaved like a batch defect, not a training error. The investigation will consider all findings," Ashby said, standing, ending the conversation the way men like him always ended conversations, by simply deciding it was over. "In the meantime, Private Marlowe is restricted to barracks pending review, and you will submit your incident statement by 1700 hours. "That's all, Sergeant Halverson." Norah stood. She did not salute crisply. She did not need to. She had already decided, somewhere between the range and this office, that she was not going to let a 26-year-old former diesel mechanic carry a dead man's weight because it was convenient for somebody's promotion board. She just didn't know yet whose promotion board that was, or how far Vireo Defense Systems was prepared to go to protect it. That night, Marlowe found Norah outside the barracks, sitting on a concrete step with a paper cup of coffee gone cold in her hands. "They're going to chapter me out," Marlo said. Her voice had none of the steadiness from the firing line. "Dishonorable discharge for a negligent discharge charge. My kids are going to grow up with that on the internet forever. They're not chaptering you out." Norah didn't look up. "Not if I have anything to do with it. You're a range NCO. What can you do?" Norah finally turned to look at her. Something in her face had changed since the range. Sharper, older. The stillness of someone recalculating an old equation with new variables. "I used to do something else," she said. "Before this." Marlo waited. "I was attached to a recon element. My job was calling data into another man's ear, so his rounds landed where they were supposed to. I got good at it, because I had to be. A round that goes where it's not supposed to go usually means somebody made a mistake with the math before the trigger was ever touched." Norah set the cup down. "Sam Roth didn't die because you flinched. He died because somebody's math was wrong a long time before that round ever got to the range. I intend to find out whose. Why would you do that?" "For me? Because 6 years ago, somebody let a piece of equipment fail, and then let a dead man take the blame for it instead," Norah said quietly. "I watched it happen. I was 28, and I didn't know how to stop it. I'm 34 now, and I do." She didn't say Wes Calder's name. She didn't need to. Something in the way she said it told Marlo this wasn't the first grave Norah Halverson had stood over, while somebody rewrote the reason for it. Marlo's eyes filled. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to hold your line," Norah said, "and let me find the round. 9 days, Marlo. That's how long we have before this becomes permanent." She didn't tell her where the number 9 came from. She'd overheard Ashby's aide mention the promotion board date in passing, and some old instinct had already started counting backward from it, the way she used to count backward from an extraction window. The base armory kept lot numbers on every ammunition crate, a detail most people never looked at twice. Norah looked at them 3 times, cross-referencing the crate that had supplied Marlo's line against the delivery manifest from Vireo Defense Systems. Lot 4471C, delivered 11 weeks ago. Signed for by Colonel Grant Ashby personally, which was unusual. Ordnance releases were normally countersigned by a supply sergeant, not signed solely by the officer in charge. She requested the quality assurance documentation for Lot 4471C through the base logistics office the next morning. The clerk behind the counter, a young specialist who clearly hadn't been told anything except to say no, informed her the file was restricted pending the incident review, the very review Ashby controlled. "Restricted by whose authority?" "Colonel Ashby's office, Sergeant. I can't release it." Norah walked out of that office with nothing, and for the first time since the range, felt something close to the particular helplessness of watching a story calcify in real time, while the only people with the power to stop it had every reason not to. That helplessness lasted exactly until Sergeant First Class Denny Whitfield found her in the motor pool parking lot that evening. Whitfield worked supply. He'd known Norah for 3 years, mostly through shared coffee and mutual disdain for paperwork delays, and he had the particular look of a man who'd seen something he wasn't supposed to see and hadn't decided yet what to do about it. "You're digging into Lot 4471C, he said without preamble. "How do you know that?" "Because I logged the delivery, and I logged something else, 2 days ago, that I haven't told anyone about." He glanced around the empty lot before continuing. "Low. Ashby put in a request yesterday to have the remaining crates from that lot transferred off-site for, quote, disposal and replacement, unquote. Effective immediately. That's 41 crates of ammunition, Norah. Nobody disposes of 41 crates in 48 hours, unless they're trying to make evidence disappear before somebody comes looking for it." Norah went very still. "When's the transfer?" "Truck scheduled for 2200 hours tomorrow night." Whitfield's jaw tightened. "I can stall the paperwork maybe 6 hours. Not more than that without it coming back on me." The clock, which had already been running in Norah's head since the range, suddenly had teeth. If the physical evidence disappeared, all she would have left was a theory and a grieving conscience. neither of which had ever been enough to overturn an official Army finding. She needed something that couldn't be quietly disposed of in a truck, paper that existed somewhere Ashby didn't control. That meant finding someone inside Vireo Defense Systems willing to talk before the crates were gone. Owen Pratt was a quality assurance engineer who had worked the Vireo production line responsible for Lot 4471C. Norah found him through a base gun show, of all places, where he sold reloading components on weekends and complained, quietly, to anyone who'd listen, about corners being cut at his job. She bought a box of casings from him and asked one careful question about pressure testing protocols, and watched his face change the way faces change when someone finally asks the question they've been waiting 6 months for somebody to ask. What she didn't notice, and wouldn't learn until later, was the man in the gray sedan parked at the far end of the gun show lot, watching her conversation with Pratt through a pair of sunglasses he never removed even in the shade. His name was Marcus Deal, and Vireo Defense Systems paid him for exactly this kind of attention. Pratt agreed to meet her the next evening at a diner off base, sliding a thumb drive across the table with the particular care of a man handing over something that might end his career either way. Lot 4471C failed pressure variance testing, Pratt said, voice low. Twice. I flagged it both times. Both times it got signed off anyway by somebody above my line. Whose signature? Pratt hesitated, then turned his laptop around. A digital approval log, time-stamped, showed an override authorization from a Vireo regional account under the name Lewis Kern, and beneath it, a corresponding acceptance signature from Fort Kestrel, dated the same week Ashby had personally signed for the delivery. He knew, Norah said, more to herself than to Pratt. Knew what? That the lot was defective before it ever left your warehouse. Pratt nodded slowly. I quit 2 weeks ago. I was going to let it go. Then I heard a kid died on your range. His hands were shaking slightly around his coffee cup. I've got 3 kids of my own in ROTAC programs. I couldn't let it go after that. Norah looked at the files on the screen for a long moment. 6 years of silence pressed against the back of her throat, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like grief. It felt like leverage. I need copies of everything, she said. And I need you willing to say this to Army CID, not just to me. Pratt's jaw tightened, then he nodded once. Tell me where to be. Neither of them noticed the gray sedan idling across the street when they left, or the man inside it lifting a phone to his ear before their cars had even cleared the lot. Norah brought the files to Warrant Officer Callum Reyes, a CID investigator who had crossed paths with her twice before over minor ordnance discrepancies and had, on both occasions, struck her as a man who actually read the paperwork instead of just stamping it. Reyes went quiet for a long stretch, scrolling through Pratt's files at his desk. This isn't a training incident anymore, he said finally. This is a fraud case with a body attached to it. Can you move on it tonight? There are 41 crates from that lot scheduled for disposal at 2200 hours. Reyes's head came up sharply. Disposal, meaning destruction of the physical evidence. Meaning exactly that. I can't get a seizure order signed in 6 hours, Norah. Not without a general officer's endorsement. And the only general officer on this installation just sat in a room defending Ashby's 11-year record. So we lose the rounds. We lose the easiest proof. Reyes rubbed his jaw. Pratt's files are a start, but a defense attorney tears a whistleblower's download apart in about 4 minutes, if there's no physical lot to match it against. I need something Ashby can't explain away as a disgruntled former employee's grudge. Norah felt the floor tilt, the particular vertigo of almost having something and then watching it slip half a step further away. Then we don't let the crates leave the bunker. Reyes studied her for a long moment. That's not exactly procedure. Neither is signing off on ammunition. You know failed testing twice, Norah said. I'm not asking you to break the law, Reyes. I'm asking you to be standing somewhere useful when I do something you didn't officially know about. Something that might have been the beginning of a smile crossed Reyes's face and disappeared just as fast. I did not hear that sentence, he said. But if certain crates happen to already be flagged for an unrelated safety inventory hold, before that truck ever arrives. That would be a paperwork matter entirely separate from tonight's disposal order. Purely coincidental timing. How fast can that hold go into the system? Reyes was already reaching for his phone. Faster than a truck can load 41 crates, if the person loading them gets delayed. At 21:40, 10 minutes before the disposal team was due to arrive, Norah and Marlo stood in the shadow of the ammunition storage bunker, watching Denny Whitfield stall a supply clerk with a deliberately confusing question about a shipment manifest that didn't exist. "This isn't range safety anymore," Marlo whispered. "This is trespassing on a restricted storage site. This is preserving evidence in an active death investigation," Norah said. "Reyes's hold order is in the system as of 6 minutes ago. We just need the crates to still be here when the MPs arrive to confirm it." A pair of headlights swung into the gravel lot behind them, not the disposal truck. A gray sedan, moving slow, deliberate, the kind of slow that wasn't looking for a parking space. Norah's whole body went still, old instinct rising before conscious thought caught up. "Get behind the bunker wall, now." Marlo didn't argue. They pressed into the shadow of the concrete as the sedan idled past, its driver scanning the lot with the flat, patient attention of a man who was paid to notice exactly this kind of movement. The sedan stopped 40 feet away. A door opened. "I know someone's out here," a voice called, unhurried, almost bored. "Colonel Ashby doesn't need this handled loud. Walk out and this stays a conversation." Marlo's breath caught. Norah put a hand flat against her arm, "Don't move," and watched a man in a dark jacket step into the wash of a security light, hand resting with practiced casualness near his hip. Behind him, from the far end of the lot, a set of headlights finally swung in that were exactly what they'd been waiting for. An Army CID sedan, moving fast, followed by 2 military police vehicles with lights dark but engines loud in the quiet night. The man in the jacket turned toward the sound half a second too late. "Federal agents, hands where I can see them." Reyes's voice cut across the lot, flat and absolute. The man didn't run. He didn't need to. He simply lowered his hand, slow, and said nothing at all, which told Norah more about who he worked for than any confession could have. But as the MPs closed in around him, Norah's eyes caught something through the sedan's open door that made her stomach drop. A phone. Screen lit. A text message visible on the display, sent 9 minutes earlier from a contact saved simply as Kern. Package secured. Second location handled. Her blood went cold. "Reyes, ask him what second location means. Now." The man gave them nothing. Not a name, not an explanation, invoking his right to silence with the practiced calm of someone who'd been coached for exactly this outcome. But the phone was seized as evidence, and by midnight, Reyes had a location pulled from its last cell tower ping 2 hours earlier. A residential address 40 minutes off base. Owen Pratt's address. Norah's pulse hammered the entire drive, old fear folding over new fear, the way it always did. The specific terror of watching a story about to repeat itself before you can stop it. They found Pratt's front door unlocked, his laptop gone from the kitchen table, and Pratt himself sitting rigid on his living room couch, hands folded tight in his lap, his face gray with the particular fear of a man who has just been reminded, in person, exactly how much he stood to lose. "They didn't touch me," Pratt said before anyone asked, his voice unsteady. "They just talked, showed me photos of my kid's school, said accidents happen to careless people all the time, and asked if I understood how careless I'd been." "Owen." Norah crouched in front of him, voice low and steady, the same voice she'd once used to keep a wounded man conscious on a mountainside. "Look at me. You already gave us the files. That threat only works if you go quiet now. They took my laptop. If that had the original documentation, you already sent copies to Reyes 12 hours ago," Norah said. "Whatever they took tonight, they took nothing that matters anymore. But I need to know right now. Are you willing to still testify, in person, in front of CID, knowing what just happened in your living room?" Pratt's hands were shaking. For a long moment, nobody in the room breathed. "My son wants to enlist next year," he said, finally quiet. "I keep thinking about what kind of army I want him walking into." He looked up, jaw tightening. "Yeah, I'll testify. Get them out of my house first, though. All of them." Reyes was already on the phone arranging protective custody. Norah stood, exhaling for what felt like the first time in an hour, and only then noticed her own hands were shaking too. Somewhere behind her, Marlowe said quietly, "This is bigger than a training range." "It always was," Norah said. "We just didn't know it yet." Colonel Ashby did not sleep that night. At 0200, alone in his quarters, he called Lewis Kern's private line, his voice low and fraying at the edges, in a way 11 years of command had never let anyone hear before. "Your man just got arrested trying to intimidate a federal witness," Ashby said. "Your other man's phone is sitting in an evidence locker with my ammunition order history and your name on half of it." Kern's voice, when it finally answered, had none of the smooth patience it carried on the base tour 2 weeks earlier. "That contractor was never Vireo personnel, Colonel. He's a private security consultant your installation hired independently. There's no paper trail connecting him to us. You told me to handle it. I told you a defective lot was a rounding error. Everything after that call was your decision, made with your signature, on your installation." A pause, cold and deliberate. "I'd start thinking very carefully about what you say to CID, Grant, because Vireo's legal department is going to be very clear that anything done to protect this contract was done unilaterally, by an Army officer, 11 days from a promotion board, with a strong personal motive to hide a training failure. That story writes itself rather easily." The line went dead before Ashby could answer. He sat alone in the dark for a long time afterward, understanding for the first time in 11 years exactly how small he had let himself become in exchange for one line on a spreadsheet, and exactly how alone that line was about to leave him. By morning, Reyes had enough for a formal fraud inquiry, Pratt's original documentation, the seized phone with Kern's texts, the security contractor now in custody and refusing to talk, and 41 crates of Lot 4471C sitting under an active evidence hold instead of scattered across a disposal site. What he did not yet have was Ashby's own signature, tied directly to knowledge of the failed testing, and without that, the colonel could still claim, credibly, that he'd been an unwitting victim of a contractor's fraud rather than its willing partner. Norah knew exactly one place that connection still existed on paper: Ashby's private office ledger in the armory, where he logged ordnance releases by hand out of habit, the same habit that had made him sign for Lot 4471C personally, instead of routing it through supply. She went to the armory that evening, alone, because Ashby kept his private office there during ordnance inventory weeks, and because an empty armory after hours was the only room on base quiet enough for the truth to land without an audience to soften it. Ashby looked up from his desk when she knocked, already annoyed before she'd said a word, though something in his face had shifted since that morning's briefing about a security contractor's arrest and a whistleblower under CID protection. He was a man watching his own careful architecture come apart in real time, and trying badly to look like it wasn't. "Sergeant Halverson, this is an odd hour. Lot 4471C failed pressure variance testing twice before you signed for it," Norah said, closing the door behind her. "Lewis Kern authorized the override. You countersigned it personally instead of routing it through supply, because you didn't want a paper trail with more than 2 names on it. And last night someone tried to make sure the physical evidence disappeared, and the whistleblower stayed quiet. I had nothing to do with what happened at that man's house. You didn't need to give the order yourself," Norah said. "You just needed Vireo to believe your promotion mattered enough that they'd protect it for you. That's the same as pulling the trigger, Colonel. You just made sure your hand wasn't the one on record. Except Kern already told you that's exactly the story he's going to tell CID, didn't he? That this was all you." Something in Ashby's face flinched, small and involuntary, and Norah understood in that instant that she'd guessed right. That somewhere between 2 and 4 in the morning, Vireo Defense Systems had already decided which of the two of them was expendable. You have no authority to. I'm not here for authority. Norah took one step closer. I'm here because 6 years ago, a company under a different name sold my unit a piece of equipment that failed at the worst possible second. And the man standing next to me paid for it with his life, while the official report blamed him for a mistake he never made. I didn't have the rank to stop that story from becoming true. I have the rank now. And this time, I have enough evidence that it doesn't matter whether you talk. Something in Ashby's composure finally cracked, thin and fast, like ice giving way underfoot. He stood so quickly his chair scraped hard against the floor, and his hand moved toward the top drawer of his desk, fast enough that for one taut second, Norah's whole body went back to a mountainside, every old instinct rising at once. Assess the threat, close the distance, control the hand before the hand controls the room. She was faster. She caught his wrist before the drawer cleared 2 inches, twisted it flat against the desk, with a grip built from years of subduing thrashing patients on medevac flights, not from anger. There's nothing in that drawer that helps you, she said quietly. You don't understand what you're threatening, Ashby said, breathing hard, something close to panic finally breaking through 11 years of careful control. Vireo doesn't lose contracts quietly. People who make noise about Vireo don't. He stopped himself half a sentence too late. People who make noise about Vireo don't what, Colonel? The door behind her opened. Warrant Officer Reyes stepped through with 2 CID agents and a look on his face that said he'd heard every word he needed to hear through the thin office wall. And behind him, unexpectedly, stood General Ferris, his expression the particular stone of a commander, realizing exactly how badly he'd trusted the wrong number on a spreadsheet. Colonel Ashby, Reyes said, step away from the desk. Ashby's shoulders sagged all at once, the particular collapse of a man who has spent 11 years building a version of himself that could not survive contact with the truth. I didn't put the round in the chamber, he said, to no one in particular. I didn't pull any trigger. No, Norah said. You just decided a boy's life was an acceptable rounding error, and then let a company decide the rest for you. Reyes read him his rights. Ashby didn't fight the cuffs. General Ferris said nothing at all, which was, in its own way, its own kind of confession. The days that followed moved the way big, slow institutions move, once they've finally been given a reason to move fast. Army CID's fraud investigation widened within a week, to include 2 other Army installations that had received ammunition from the same Vireo production run, a detail that turned Norah's stomach in a way the initial discovery hadn't. Sam Roth had not been the only recruit standing near a Vireo round that year. He had simply been the first one anyone had bothered to ask hard questions about. Lewis Kern was arrested at a regional airport attempting to board a flight out of the country 3 days after Ashby's arrest. His phone containing enough correspondence to implicate not just himself, but 2 executives above him, who had known about the failed testing for months before Ashby ever signed for a single crate. Private Tessa Marlowe's negligent discharge finding was formally withdrawn. The chapter packet that had been sitting on a desk waiting for a signature was quietly shredded instead. General Ferris made the call to Carol Roth himself, 3 weeks after 2 officers in dress uniforms had stood on her porch, with a folded flag's worth of careful language. This time he did not ration the details. Mrs. Roth, I owe you the truth, and I'm sorry it took this long to reach you, he said. Your son did not die because of anything a fellow soldier did wrong. He died because a defective round was allowed onto our range by people who valued a contract renewal over the safety of the recruits training under it. That failure belongs to this installation and to the company that supplied the ammunition. It does not belong to your son, and it never belonged to the young woman standing next to him. For a long moment, the line was silent except for breathing. Thank you for telling me the real one, Carol Roth said finally, her voice breaking on the last word. I kept looking at his picture on my wall, wondering what version of him I was supposed to grieve. Grieve the one who was there, Ferris said quietly. That's the only one that was ever true. She asked, before hanging up, if his name could be read at the next range dedication ceremony. Ferris told her it already would be. Norah submitted a full statement to CID that did not mention Wes Calder by name, because some griefs are not owed to a case file. But that night, for the first time in 6 years, she called an old number she still had memorized, Wes Calder's sister, who had never stopped believing her brother's death had been explained away too easily, and told her that a thread had finally been pulled all the way to its source, and that it hadn't been him. It had never been him. The line was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you," Wes's sister said finally, her voice thick. "I always knew." "I know," Norah said. "I should have believed you sooner." 3 weeks later, Fort Kestrel's live fire range opened again for a new qualification cycle. Norah stood at the same 15-meter line, sleeves still down, scar still hidden, watching a fresh class of recruits nervous shuffle into position. Tessa Marlowe stood beside her now, not as a recruit, but as an assistant range instructor, her chapter packet ash, and her name restored to every roster it belonged on. "Feels different," Marlowe said, watching the new recruits check their weapons. "It is different," Norah said. "Ammunition's coming from a different contractor now. Full third-party inspection on every lot before it reaches this line. Reyes made sure of that." Marlowe glanced at her. "You never told me what happened to you before this. Before the range." Norah watched a young recruit steady his rifle at the line. Breathing counted in 4s, the way she'd taught 100 recruits to breathe since the day she'd stopped trusting her own memory of a mountainside. "I lost someone," she said finally, "because a company decided a small failure rate was an acceptable cost of doing business, and because a story got told about whose fault it was that made it easier for everyone but him to sleep at night." She checked the first recruit's stance, adjusted his elbow half an inch. "I couldn't fix that one in time. This one I could." Marlowe was quiet for a moment. "Sam's mother sent a letter to the company commander, said she wanted his name read at the next range dedication." "I heard," Norah said. "Names should stay attached to the truth, not the convenient version of it." The whistle sounded. Down the line, 31 new recruits raised their rifles, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Norah Halverson didn't brace for the sound of a shot breaking wrong. It broke clean, every single time. That evening, packing up the range log, Norah's phone buzzed once with a message from Reyes. Federal Review pulled Virio's full shipment history going back 3 years. "You're not going to like what else is on that list. Call me tomorrow." She stood alone at the empty firing line for a long moment, the sun going down orange behind the pines, and felt the particular cold of a story she'd thought was finished, quietly opening back up beneath her feet. Somewhere out there, other ranges were still firing rounds from lots nobody had checked yet. Not the end of the story, just the part where it stopped being a lie. Reyes was waiting outside her office the next morning before she'd even finished her coffee, a folder under his arm, and an expression that told her the call the night before hadn't been an exaggeration. "Virio's shipment history doesn't just show Lot 4471C, he said, spreading printouts across her desk. "It shows the same production run split and relabeled under 4 different lot numbers before it ever left the warehouse. Standard practice for them, apparently. Spread a bad batch thin enough across enough different labels, and no single installation's failure rate ever looks statistically alarming enough to trigger a recall review." Norah scanned the documents, her stomach tightening with every line. Where did the other 3 lots go? 2 installations already used theirs up in training cycles, 18 months ago. No incidents reported, which either means they were fine, or means somebody got lucky, and nobody's looked hard enough yet to find out otherwise. Reyes tapped the last page. "The 4th lot is still sitting in an ammunition bunker at Fort Larkspur, a National Guard training installation outside San Antonio. Relabeled as Lot 5102A. It's scheduled to be issued for a live fire qualification cycle in 60 hours. Norah felt the floor tilt the way it had tilted the night the disposal truck was scheduled. Except this time the ticking clock belonged to soldiers she'd never met. 60 hours, she repeated. That's assuming nothing moves the schedule up. Reyes closed the folder. I put in a formal notification to Fort Larkspur's ordnance office an hour ago. Standard channels. I haven't heard back yet. And if standard channels don't move fast enough? Reyes looked at her for a long moment. Then I'm going to need someone on the ground there who already knows exactly what a defective round looks like before it kills somebody. I already cleared it with CID. You'd be traveling as a technical consultant on an active fraud investigation. Not exactly by the book, but not against it either. He held her gaze. You don't have to say yes. When's the flight? She said. Fort Larkspur's ordnance office was smaller than Kestrel's, staffed by a lieutenant named Priya Okafor, who read Reyes's notification with visible skepticism and even more visible reluctance to disrupt a training schedule 2 days before a division-level inspection. With respect, Warrant Officer, I've got a general's inspection team arriving in 3 days and a qualification cycle that's been on the books for 2 months, Okafor said, arms crossed behind her desk. You're asking me to pull ammunition based on a fraud investigation happening at a completely different installation. I'm asking you to pull ammunition based on a documented pressure testing failure rate tied to the exact same production run that killed a recruit 3 weeks ago at Fort Kestrel, Reyes said, sliding the file across her desk. The lot number is different. The chemistry isn't. Okafor's eyes moved over the documents, her jaw tightening incrementally with every page. This says preliminary findings, not confirmed. Norah stepped forward. I watched a hangfire round travel 11 meters laterally and kill a 20-year-old private 3 weeks ago. I'm not asking you to trust a preliminary finding. I'm asking you to hold ammunition for 48 hours while an independent lab confirms whether the rounds sitting in your bunker right now came from the same failed batch. If they didn't, you lose nothing but 2 days. If they did, I've got 31 soldiers scheduled to fire them Thursday morning. Okafor finished quietly. Something in her face shifted. The particular recalculation of an officer weighing career inconvenience against something she couldn't unknow anymore. All right, I'll hold the qualification cycle pending confirmation. But if this comes back clean, Warrant Officer, I want it on record that this delay came from CID, not from me. Understood, Reyes said. Thank you. What none of them knew yet was that the hold order Okafor signed that afternoon would reach Vireo Defense Systems regional office within the hour, carried there by a supply contractor on Vireo's payroll who had been quietly flagging exactly this kind of paperwork for months. Diane Castellan had spent 11 years building Vireo Defense Systems Operations Division into something the board trusted completely, and she had spent the 3 weeks since Ashby's arrest privately dismantling every thread that might connect that trust to a dead recruit in Georgia. She was 51, precise, unhurried in a way that made subordinates nervous rather than reassured, and she did not intend to let a hold order at a Texas National Guard base become the thread that finally unraveled everything Kern's arrest hadn't already exposed. She arrived at Fort Larkspur's gate the next morning under a visitor's badge that identified her only as a Vireo quality assurance representative there to assist with the confirmation testing, smiling at the young specialist checking credentials with the particular warmth of someone who had never once needed to raise her voice to get what she wanted. By that afternoon, she had positioned herself inside the ammunition bunker under the pretense of assisting the independent lab technicians Reyes had flown in, and had already begun, quietly, methodically, switching sample rounds pulled for testing, with rounds from a separate, unaffected lot she'd brought with her in a locked case. She did not know yet that Norah Halverson had spent 6 years learning to notice exactly the kind of small, careful movement Castellan was making with her hands. She switched the samples, Norah said, pulling Reyes aside behind a stack of crates the moment Castellan stepped out to take a phone call. Watch her hands next time she reaches into that case. She's not testing our rounds. She's testing hers. Reyes's eyes narrowed toward the bunker entrance. You're sure? I called elevation corrections for 6 years, watching hand movements from 200 meters out. I'm sure. Reyes didn't hesitate. He signaled 2 waiting CID agents with a small motion of his hand, and within 90 seconds, Castellan was being asked, with polite but absolute firmness, to step away from the sample case and place her hands where they could be seen. This is an unlawful search of proprietary quality assurance materials, Castellan said, her voice as calm and unbothered as if she were discussing a scheduling conflict. I'll have Virio's legal team on the phone with your commanding officer within the hour. Your commanding officer's phone is already occupied, Norah said, stepping into view. Lewis Kern used it 3 weeks ago to explain, in writing, exactly how Virio relabels failed production lots to avoid recall scrutiny. We already know what you're doing here. We just needed to watch you do it. Something behind Castellan's composed expression flickered, there and gone, the first crack in 11 years of practiced control. Open the case, Reyes said. Inside, beneath a false bottom, sat 3 sample rounds from Lot 5102A. The genuine, unaltered, defective rounds Castellan had been planning to smuggle out and replace with clean substitutes before the independent lab ever got to test them. 60 crates of this lot are still sitting 40 feet from where 31 soldiers are scheduled to fire live rounds in 18 hours, Norah said. You weren't here to help confirm a test result, Miss Castellan. You were here to make sure it came back clean no matter what. Castellan said nothing at all, which by now, Norah had learned was exactly what people said when there was nothing left to say that wouldn't make things worse. The independent lab's confirmed results came back at 040 that night. Lot 5102-A matched Lot 4471C's chemical signature and pressure failure rate almost exactly. Same production run, same defect, same odds of another hang fire happening on a live line, this time to soldiers who had never heard Sam Roth's name and would never know how close they'd come to learning it the same way he had. Lieutenant Okafor pulled the entire lot from issue before dawn, personally supervising its transfer into an evidence hold under armed guard, her earlier reluctance replaced by the particular grim thoroughness of an officer who understood exactly what she'd almost signed off on. At 0600, 31 soldiers reported to the range for a qualification cycle that no longer existed and were issued ammunition from an entirely different, independently verified lot instead. None of them ever knew how close they'd come to a training day that could have ended the way Fort Kestrel's had. Diane Castellan was charged that same week, alongside Lewis Kern, and her cooperation, once the false-bottomed case made any denial pointless, provided federal investigators with the final piece they needed: internal Virio communications, showing the relabeling scheme had been standard company practice for nearly 6 years, applied to at least 11 different Army and National Guard installations across 4 states. The Department of Defense terminated Virio Defense Systems small arms ammunition contracts Army-wide within the month. Every installation that had received ammunition from any of the affected production runs underwent mandatory independent testing before another round was ever issued. 6 weeks after Sam Roth died, Fort Kestrel held a range dedication ceremony on a cold, clear morning, the kind of sky that makes even a training range look like it means something. Carol Roth stood at the front of a small crowd, a folded flag in her hands, listening to a base commander read her son's name alongside a bronze plaque that would sit at the entrance to the range for as long as the range existed. She had asked, in the weeks since General Ferris's phone call, that the plaque include not just her son's name, but the phrase "he did not fail." The system did, a request the Army had, after some deliberation, honored exactly as written. Tessa Marlowe stood near the front in dress uniform, her voice steady when Carol Roth asked her, quietly, before the ceremony began, to say a few words. She talked about a recruit who used to make everyone laugh in the chow line, who wanted, more than anything, to make his mother proud of a decision she'd worried about since the day he signed his enlistment papers. She did not talk about the discharge she'd nearly received, because that story belonged to her, not to Sam. Norah stood near the back, sleeves down, watching the plaque catch the morning light. Beside her, unexpectedly, stood a woman she'd only ever spoken to over the phone, Wes Calder's sister, who had asked, when Norah called her weeks earlier, if she might be allowed to attend a ceremony for a soldier she'd never met, because some griefs need somewhere to stand, even when the name on the plaque belongs to someone else. He would have liked this range, Wes's sister said quietly, watching the flag get folded into Carol Roth's hands, the version where the truth actually gets read out loud. Yeah, Norah said. He would've. 3 months later, Norah Halverson was reassigned, at General Ferris's personal recommendation, to a newly created position within Army Training and Doctrine Command, Independent Ordnance Safety Liaison, tasked with reviewing ammunition contracts and quality assurance compliance across training installations nationwide. It was not a promotion she had asked for. It was, Ferris told her, one she had already earned twice over before anyone thought to offer it. Tessa Marlowe took over as Fort Kestrel's primary range instructor, teaching new recruits to trust their weapons the same way Norah had once taught her, and, quietly, without ever making it a lecture, teaching them what it looked like when someone refused to let a convenient story stand in for the truth. On her last morning at Fort Kestrel, Norah opened the small tin box at the bottom of her wall locker for the first time in over 3 years. Inside sat a set of dog tags, a folded photograph of 2 soldiers laughing on a desert airstrip, and a note in handwriting she still recognized instantly. Pave, if something happens to me, don't let them decide the story without you in the room. W.C. She had read that note once, 6 years ago, in a medevac bay with someone else's blood still drying on her sleeves, and had spent 6 years afterward believing she'd already failed to honor it. She closed the box gently, packed it into her duffel bag instead of the bottom of a locker, and carried it with her onto a plane the next morning toward a job that existed, in the end, because she finally had. Somewhere behind her, a new range instructor was teaching a new class of recruits to breathe in 4s, to trust the rifle, to never assume the story you're told is the only one that happened, not the end of the story. Just the part where enough people finally stopped letting it be a lie. Up next, you've got 2 more incredible stories waiting on your screen. If this one hit you, tap to watch the next, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Oh, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see where you're watching from.